Good enough. That'll do it. It's easier for us to see, of course, in hindsight, but that Jesus walked out of the tomb should have been obvious to us, predictable. In fact, I know we were surprised, but we really had no right to be. The first two verses of the Bible lay out the pattern that was about to follow. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, and dark was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of the Lord, the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Formless, empty darkness, the pre-ordered form, the chaos from which order would arrive. And the order that would soon arrive would stand in stark contrast to formless, empty, and dark. We see it, of course, in the fullness when the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. He came that we might have life and life to the full, and that life was the light of men, in stark contrast to formless, empty, and dark. It's no surprise that he who brought the new creation walked in the steps of his Father, who organized and created the old, or the original creation. And so when he comes into our formless and empty and dark lives and speaks words of creation to us, of fullness and light and life, it ought to be no surprise to us. And what order we find around us. The complexity of what surrounds us has often astounded us. And the more we look, the more complex and astounding the whole thing becomes. It doesn't even matter in which direction we look. When we look at the vastness of space, now with uncountable galaxies, never mind stars, and that's if the observable universe is all there is. We're now beginning to think there's more beyond even that which we can observe. But even if we forgot all of that, and all we had to look at was the globe on which we ride, we still haven't got to the bottom of what's under our feet. Unfathomable depths, uncountable species, still being discovered, and unscalable, not unscalable heights. We get to them, but even when we get to them, we're lucky to get to them, and there's certainly very little research going on when and if we do. The perceivable order of what surrounds us is just beginning to be understood. In the year 2000, they opened the Millennium Bridge over the River Thames in London and let all the people on. Before too long, there were sirens sounding and they had to get the people off. The people, if you watch the footage, it's absolutely amazing. If you watch the footage, you end up seeing hundreds of strangers all walking in sync, like penguins. But penguins in absolute step with each other. And of course that would put strain on the bridge. Christian Huygens invented the pendulum clock so that sailors could gauge where they were on the ocean. They could already get the longitude by the stars, but latitude, or was it the other way around? Whatever one it was. The other one, the one that they needed, was the time that it was from the port from which they left in order to do their calculations. But clocks in the 1600s were notoriously bad. By the time they were halfway over the ocean, they were already 15, 20 minutes out of sync, and so they couldn't find out where they are. Christian Huygens invented the pendulum clock, which was far more accurate. But he was sick one day, and he was running experiments in his house, so he hung two pendulums clocks from the same beam so that he could understand things. So he set one swinging and he set the other one swinging, and then he was amazed because after a while the pendulum clocks started swinging identically. We've found out since the same happens with metronomes. There's a little experiment you can do, in fact, if you put like 2 soda cans and then a piece of wood over the soda cans and stick metronomes on top, all firing at different, eventually they all start ticking. Apparently not observable, of course, to the naked eye, but every time they move, they nudge each other and they nudge the beam upon which they sit until everything comes in to order. This happens, of course, when that which is moving is all hung from the same beam. However, what is not so easily decipherable is why we're beginning to see the same things in nature. And we're beginning to see them in nature. Lightning bugs, for example. You saw lightning bugs all flashing, thousands of them. Well, if you stay long enough, what you'll see eventually is that the lightning bugs, if you look through time lapse, it looks random at first, and then it looks like waves of light, and then all at the same time. Thousands of these little guys, they've all adjusted themselves to their neighbour until such time as they all start ticking in the same direction. Even the plants and the trees, as you know, as we now know, are set to maintain the balance of this life. They just so happen to consume the carbon dioxide that would kill us and that we don't necessarily need. We just happen to consume the oxygen that they convert the carbon dioxide and the sunlight into. Something that doesn't seem to dawn on a lot of people. If there's no carbon dioxide, the plants die. It's what they eat, for Pete's sake. However, what we're now discovering, well, those who read the science are discovering that when there's an abundance of carbon dioxide, the trees are gorging themselves and going into hyperdrive and producing, well, not only producing more of themselves because they're eating and getting stronger because they're eating, which makes them bigger and produce more and more often. It's all set to balance. The lungs for the planet, for example, are not the rainforests. Seagrass, we now understand, seagrass, for the amount of oxygen that it produces, makes the rainforests look like a daycare facility. Which is kind of interesting, because if I was God and I wanted the planet to breathe, I wouldn't make it rely on something we'd have to build houses out of. I'd make it out of something we couldn't build anything out of, that was plenty of it, and it's tasteless. It's genius. The order we see around us is staggering. Unfortunately for our media, this planet is astoundingly robust and resilient. Yes. Unfortunately, that doesn't sell as much advertising as we're all going to die next year. The order that we see around us, and it isn't giving way until the one who made it decides that it's going to give way. And when he so determines that it will give way, trust me, all the turtle-saving recycling methods aren't going to help. Does that mean we don't care for the planet? Of course not. We're stewards. We're the stewards of the planet. But I'll tell you, you can save your scaremongering for another sucker. This is my Father's world. My Father's world. And we already know how it will end. And it's in good hands. And it will accomplish everything that He determined it to accomplish. And it's going nowhere until He decides it. What do we think? What do we think, we as Christians? I don't mind the morons in the world following all this garbage, But we Christians ought to know better. What do we think? God's running around heaven, wringing his hands, crying, thinking, oh man, what was I thinking? I should have planted more trees. I had no idea they'd find all that coal and oil I'd made for them. The planet will do exactly what its creator determined it to do. Let there be light, and there was. And then if we didn't get the message, then a young Galilean appeared one day and spoke to the weather and spoke to the planet and spoke to everything around him, and everything around him jumped to his obedience. This planet will do what God has determined, and the sheer order within the system ought to give us confidence in this. We shouldn't be like these morons who are throwing themselves off their ideological skyscrapers because they think the planet's stock market's about to crash. We're meant to be the ones who are telling them, this is our Father's world. And then when we have their attention, then we can divert it to the resilience of this planet and to the resilience that it has showed for thousands of years, following the same pattern that has always appeared. Order coming out of chaos. Sure. It's what our Father does best. The dove returning to the ark with an olive leaf in its mouth. What is that? That's order following the chaos of the flood. When they arrived at Sinai and received the law, what is that? That's order following the chaos of Egypt. When Israel cleared the promised land, what was that? That was order following the chaos of idolaters who were sacrificing their children for a better harvest, for Pete's sake. And then Jesus arrives. Jesus arrives, and among many other people he meets a man, demon-possessed, so possessed. His name, Legion. He sits naked, breaking the chains of that which binds him. A single life, representative of the entire system. You cannot get more chaotic than this man. He is empty, he is formless, and he is dark until he meets the Creator of this world. One word from Jesus, and there he is, sitting clothed and in his right mind. What is that? That's order following chaos. A woman's been bleeding for 12 years. 12 years. Can't go to the temple. She spent everything she had on the doctors. And instead of getting better, the text tells us she grew worse. A woman who now is emotionally exhausted, physically, spiritually, and financially bankrupt. You don't get more chaotic. What does she do? For Pete's sake, she doesn't even have a conversation with him. She's lucky to get a touch. And the touch that she gets is the fringe. The fringe of him. The fringe of him brings order to that life. This is all the new creation bringing order to the old cursed creation. And it's happening wherever that young Galilean turns up. The chaos of 5,000 hungry people solved with a packed lunch. The chaos of a storm that was threatening to kill them, annihilated with a rebuke. And also included in this, of course, was Jesus teaching himself, bringing order to the prevailing and chaotic wisdom of the day. He listened to it. He heard what they said, and he stood toe-to-toe with them. He exposed them for every ounce of evil they had. And then he said, no. Love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. Forgive those who sin against you. Turn the other cheek. Go the extra mile. What is that? That's the creator of the world speaking order into chaos. So what does all that have to do with Easter? Are you kidding me? Is there anything more chaotic than death? Out of all the things we fear, isn't that it? Out of all the days that speak dread into us, isn't that the day we fear? And what does he do with it? What does he do with it? After 3 formless, empty, and dark days, a stone begins to roll, and out he walks. Looks at us and we look at him. Our young prince with death in his hand, limp and dead. And he looks at us and says to us, that's what you were afraid of? And casts it aside with all the contempt that it deserves. And the promises of promises that what we saw that day in him will one day come to us all, will one day come to the entire system. The whole thing resurrected to new life and order, finally, fully, ultimately restored. And the chaos gone. Forever gone. Oh, remember the pendulum clocks and the metronomes and the lightning bugs? Well, our beloved scientists and physicists are now beginning to believe that they're seeing the same thing in the planets, the orbits, even the moon. It's why they're saying it's why we always see the same side of the face of the moon. It's now worked itself, nudged itself in harmony with the planet it's revolving around. I think it's Saturn. I might be wrong on that. But if it's Saturn that has 3 moons that rotate, you'll find that when you watch the rotation of those 3 moons, for every rotation, the nearest one has, the second one does 2, and the third one does 4. In perfect. They're now beginning to see the same thing among the stars and the galaxies. But this is amazing to them as they see it, because there's no connection. They're not all hung from the same beam. To which we reply, oh yes, they are. Because this is my Father's world. Happy Easter, everybody.